You notice it first in the smallest moments. A room full of people, voices rising and falling like restless birds, and you standing there with a cup in your hand, watching the scene as if it were happening behind glass. They talk about the weather, the errands, the latest outrage on a glowing screen. Heads nod, laughter flares. The rhythm of it all continues without you. And something in you steps back, not out of pride, not out of judgment, but because you simply cannot find your place in the noise. You used to move easily in these circles. You knew how to fill the empty spaces with chatter, how to smooth the moments of silence with a polite remark. Now the effort feels strange, heavy, your tongue slows, your attention drifts. You find yourself studying the way people repeat the same lines, the same concerns, as though reciting a script they didn't know they'd memorized. Small talk used to feel harmless. Now it feels like a room too warm, a sweater too tight. Something in you begins to overheat under the fluorescent lights, under the pleasant surfaces, under the stories that never touch anything real. You hear the practiced tone in someone's voice and feel your energy fold inward, protective, cautious, like a candle shielding itself from wind. Nothing dramatic has happened, no great disappointment, no sharp betrayal. What has changed is quieter than that. You've begun to see beneath things, beneath the rehearsed smiles, beneath the opinions repeated from yesterday's broadcast, beneath the frantic need to fill silence before it reveals something true. And when you see beneath, it becomes harder to pretend that the surface is enough. You sit among the chatter and feel a tiredness that has nothing to do with your body. It's the fatigue of listening to words that never land, never root, never open. It's the fatigue of watching people chase distraction because stillness feels too honest. You sense the current moving underneath them, the fear, the longing, the unspoken ache, and you know they cannot speak of it yet. They don't even know how close it sits. So you pull back softly, not out of superiority, but out of sincerity. Your presence wants depth now, clear water instead of ripple and glare. You want conversations that breathe, not ones that merely pass time. And when you cannot find them, you'd rather sit quietly, alone, than lose yourself in a room full of voices that never touch the ground. This is not loneliness. This is recognition. A small, steady awareness rising in you like the first clean breath after stepping out of a crowded room. There is a particular ache that comes when you begin to see clearly in a world that prefers soft focus. It is not anger. It is not superiority. It is the quiet sorrow of speaking in a room where no one quite hears you, even when you whisper gently, even when you try to meet them where they stand. You say something honest, something that rises from your deeper self, and it lands with a dull thud. Eyes drift. The subject shifts. The moment dissolves like breath fading from a fogged mirror, and you sit there, feeling that subtle collapse inside. A little grief, a little acceptance, an old familiar ache. You start to notice how often you swallow your words, how often you soften your perception so it doesn't unsettle anyone, how often you sit in silence not because you have nothing to say, but because saying it would only widen the distance. We learn to dim ourselves long before we realize we're doing it. We learn to nod along so the room stays calm. We learn to edit our truth into something smaller, safer, more digestible. And each time we do, we retreat a little farther inward. It isn't that others are unwilling. It's that they're still asleep inside the very dream you've begun to outgrow. They hear through a different filter. They listen from a different layer. And so you feel the gap, not dramatic, not tragic, just present. Like standing at the edge of a party, knowing you should feel connected, instead feeling the faint distance of someone who's already half outside the door. There is longing in this, a tender longing for someone to see what you see without flinching. A longing for a conversation that leans deeper, slower, gentler. A longing for a moment where you don't have to translate yourself into something less real. You want to be met where you truly live now, in that quieter, clearer place. In that stillness that doesn't need decoration. Most days you speak and feel unheard. You show and feel unseen. You try softly, and then you stop trying. The silence that follows is heavy at first, like a coat you didn't choose to wear. But with time it becomes a kind of refuge. A place where you don't have to negotiate your depth. We don't withdraw because we dislike people. We withdraw because staying becomes too costly, when no one recognizes the language we now speak. And slowly, inevitably, we learn this truth. The more awake you are, the fewer stay beside you. There comes a moment, often without ceremony, when the fog thins. Not all at once. Not with revelation or thunder. Just a gradual clearing, like morning light touching a field you've walked through in darkness. Shapes sharpen. Edges return. You begin to see what was always there, waiting for your eyes to adjust. This is the mechanism of seeing. Quiet. Precise. Unforced. You notice how people speak in circles when something simple sits underneath. You watch how conflict blooms from fear, not malice. You sense how much of life is performed rather than lived. And with each small recognition, another layer of mist dissolves. The clearing itself is not painful, the distance it creates is. Because once the reflection sharpens, you can no longer pretend you do not see. The mirror becomes honest. The water becomes still. Familiar distortions no longer hold. You stand among others the same way you stand beside a lake on a windless day, aware of every ripple, every shift in light, every movement beneath the surface. Nothing dramatic, nothing mystical. Just an attunement that makes pretense impossible. Clarity does not ask permission. It changes your relationship with the world simply by arriving. You find yourself speaking less, not from withdrawal but from precision. Words lose their usefulness when you can see the truth resting behind them. Noise becomes weight. Small talk floats harmlessly on the surface. You no longer reach for it. The habit is gone, and this, quietly, creates space around you. People feel it, even if they cannot name it. The way your gaze doesn't follow the usual lines, the way your attention lands differently, the way you no longer participate in the shared fog. Some step back without realizing why. Others fill the gap with brighter chatter, hoping to re-establish the old rhythm. But the rhythm is gone. The world moves at one pace, you move at another. Solitude forms not as a choice, but as a consequence. Not exile, alignment. Not punishment, clarity. And as the distance settles, you begin to understand something you once resisted. Seeing truth naturally separates you from illusion. The more precise the vision, the quieter the path. In the end, it's very simple. Almost stark in its truth, clear sight carries its own solitude. There comes a point when the quiet no longer feels like a retreat. It feels like homecoming. A return to the rhythm you somehow forgot you were allowed to keep. You notice this in your breath first. It lengthens. It softens. It stops bracing for the next interruption. You're no longer waiting for someone to misunderstand you, or for a conversation to veer into the familiar territory, where you must shrink to fit. The old tension dissolves, not with effort, but with simple recognition. You don't have to perform to belong to your own life. Stillness begins to feel less like absence and more like presence. You sit in a room, your room, and the air is steady. No one is pulling at your attention. No one is asking you to shape yourself into something smaller, brighter, more convenient. You realize how much space you truly have when you stop offering it away. And a small, almost humorous realization arrives. You are not apathetic. You are finally paying attention. The world trained you to believe that constant motion is engagement, that constant reaction is care. But here, in the slow breathing of an ordinary afternoon, you understand that calmness is not withdrawal. Calmness is mastery. A quiet refusal to be dragged into every passing ripple. A gentle knowing that your presence does not need to be loud to be real. You feel this shift in ordinary moments. When you choose a pause instead of an explanation. When you let someone misunderstand you without rushing to fix it. When you sit by a window and simply watch the light move across the floor, unbothered by the thought that you should be somewhere else, proving something. There is a kind of quiet pride in this. Not the pride that stands tall, but the one that sits comfortably in its own chair, content with its own company. You no longer chase belonging in places that cost you your peace. You no longer barter your energy for a moment of temporary recognition. You no longer measure your worth by how much noise you make in the world. Instead, you settle, not downward, inward, into the center you abandoned while trying to be everything to everyone. And as you rest there, in that still center, something opens. A soft, grounded truth that feels almost like a long, delayed exhale. You do not need to prove you are alive. You simply are. There is a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty at all. It feels aware, as if the world is still speaking, but you no longer need to answer every sound. You begin to notice this in the way you watch things now. A news broadcast flickers across a television with the volume muted. The mouths move, the hands gesture, the urgency plays out in bright colors. And yet, without sound, the whole performance looks strangely harmless, almost theatrical, almost absurd. And you realize how much of life's noise depends on your participation. You see this same pattern everywhere. A disagreement that used to pull you in now drifts past like a cloud. A stranger's outburst feels less like a confrontation and more like weather, passing, temporary, not yours to hold. Even your own thoughts lose their authority. They rise, they dissolve, they make room for others. They no longer demand a reaction. Silence begins to guide you. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of understanding. You don't need to explain what the other person cannot yet hear. You don't need to correct every misunderstanding. You don't need to tighten yourself around every passing discomfort. You simply watch. It feels like walking through a forest without leaving footprints, like moving through the day without pushing against it. You see the patterns, the habits, the dramas people cling to, and instead of resisting, you observe with a kind of gentle distance, not cold, not indifferent, just clear. Bird crosses a wide sky with no intention other than its own movement. No audience. No need to perform. You begin to understand something similar about yourself. That the mind, when it no longer fights the world, becomes spacious. That awareness, when it stops interfering, becomes wisdom. You do less and somehow perceive more. You speak less and somehow say more. Silence itself becomes a kind of intelligence, a way of seeing without pushing, a way of knowing without holding. And as this deepens, you recognize the truth that has been waiting beneath all your noise. Real clarity needs no defense. It simply sees. And that is enough. There comes a shift, almost imperceptible at first, when your clarity softens. Not because it weakens, but because it finally understands. You look at people the way you might look at a distant city at night. Thousands of small windows glowing, each carrying its own story, its own dream, its own quiet confusion. You simply watch the lights flicker, each at its own pace, each in its own time. This is where empathy returns. Not the old kind, tangled with urgency and the need to fix, but a gentler version that stands beside life rather than leaning into it. We begin to see the exhaustion behind someone's anger, the fear woven into their stubbornness, the loneliness sitting quietly underneath their loud opinions. Noticing these things used to overwhelm you. Now it softens you. We understand, with a kind of warm neutrality, that most people are not unkind. They are simply asleep within their own stories. They are moving through days shaped by old wounds, old teachings, old echoes they've never questioned. You see the patterns. They repeat themselves like an unending loop. And instead of tightening, you breathe. You let the moment pass without trying to redirect it. There is grace in this. The grace of not interfering. The grace of letting someone keep their dream until they are ready to wake. Once you would have tried to help, to explain, illuminate. Now you feel the futility of that old impulse. A candle behind glass can be seen, but it cannot warm the room. People must lift the glass themselves. And until they do, you wait with patience that asks for nothing. We carry a softer understanding. Everyone is doing the best they can with the level of clarity they have. And that includes us. No one is ahead. No one is behind. We are simply in different rooms of the same vast house, each learning how to open a window. This does not make us distant. It makes us gentle. Quiet kinship forms, subtle, almost anonymous. a feeling of standing with others without needing to move them. And in that understated unity, something deep settles. We walk separately, yes, but we see each other now, quietly, kindly, across the dream. There comes a morning, unremarkable to anyone else, when you wake and feel something subtle, something steady, something that has been growing beneath all your quiet choices. A kind of ease, a kind of enough. Not triumph, not enlightenment, not the thrill of discovery. Just a gentle settling inside your own life. You sit by an open window, the early light stretching across the room in soft, obedient lines. The world is beginning again, the way it always does, without asking your permission or offering a reason. You watch it with calm eyes, no urgency, no striving, just the simple recognition that you are here, breathing in a rhythm that finally belongs to you. Awakening was never the summit they made it sound like. It was never a badge or a title. It was the slow removal of what was false until the truth no longer needed to be chased. It was the quiet return to what you always suspected, that peace is not an achievement. It is the natural state beneath the noise. You feel no need to announce anything. Stillness does not require an audience. You do not feel above others nor ahead. You feel beside them, walking a different path, perhaps, but made of the same earth, held by the same sky. There is solitude in this, yes, not the old kind that felt like distance. This solitude is spacious. It touches everything without clinging to anything. It lets the world be the world, bright, messy, loud, asleep, waking, and leaves you free to meet it without resistance. You stand at the edge of your own life the way one stands at the shore in early dawn. The sea is calm, the horizon clear, the air cool and honest. Nothing asks you to become more than you are. Nothing pulls you back into the person you used to perform. You simply exist in the quiet truth you've uncovered, as natural as the tide returning, as certain as light following darkness. First time, you understand there is nowhere to arrive. Only this steady unfolding, this gentle awareness, this soft place to rest, and from that still center, the final line rises without effort, as if it had been waiting the whole time. You are simply awake.